You and I are predetermined nonsense, and that's okay. You and I have predetermined consequence, and that's okay. And that's okay. You and I are locked into our destiny, and that's okay. And that's okay. Predetermined nonsense have predetermined consequence. You and that's okay. You and predetermined nonsense. Look out, and that's okay. You gotta know what you want. You gotta do it. Into our destiny, and that's okay. And that's okay. Nothing seems to go right. Melodies don't sound right. It's true. Days disappear. Shadows remain plainly clear. The door opens, and the fizzing in my beer slows. The door opens as it slows. of something moving like a blanket in the wind. A pretty little blanket, perfect to heal me in the end. The door opens and the fizzing in my beer slows. She walks by and the spinning in my head grows. The door opens as it slows. I wish that I was pretty, more pretty than reflections look tonight. But I'm past the point of caring. It's time to make a moment. Let's not make a moment. This shouldn't be a moment. The door opens and the fizzing in my beer slows. She walks by, the spinning in my head grows. When the door opens and the fizzing in my beer slows, as she walks by, oh, she walks by, the spinning in my head grows. Watch it go. The door opens and it slows. Closing sale, everything must go, nothing left behind, no wild oats to sow. It's out of my way, I'm done now, you see. You took the meat, but not my bones. Now throw away your key. One foot out the door, persistent. You are frozen in time. Oh, I love you slips out of my mind. So sail, set sail, a little bird. Just go and set sail. Set sail, set sail, a little bird. Just go and set sail. I'll take my ship away as the storm rolls in. I hope the wind is with me, and I hope you've learned that the pirate within me is sworn to the truth. Live or die by this rule. Something old and something new is the treasure within me. As sad as it seems, you will come to know what it all means to me. Set sail, little bird. Just go and set sail. Set sail, set sail, little bird. You just go now and set sail. Some pictures and some memories, ones I can't forget. On the crest of my black heart, you best not forget that the pirate never loses. He always collects one way or another. Now you can clear up all your regrets of the time you set sail with that pirate from the sky. You will remember him until that day that you die. Set sail, little bird. Now come on, just set sail. Set sail, little bird. Now I want you to set sail. Set sail, oh, little as it rolled, I thought of home. Your clothes are on the floor, our runs to the store, your favorite Slurpee, it's on your chinny. Did you know, or think about before? The chords will say he didn't know, but he knows. He remembers the store. I would never admit it, but you were the best of me. I would never admit it, but you were the rest of me. I kicked the pebble down the road, I thought you should know. The music that we sing while drowning the shades, the fuck we made. Let's get louder, go harder. Let's get louder, go harder. The chords will say he didn't know, but he knows. He remembers the store. Did you know who I think about before? I chucked a pebble by the store. Your favorite Slurpee, gets us thrown in jail because people happen to be offended. Skepticism. Do you know what you believe? All right, folks. Conclusion available right into Bruce here. So Bruce on Twitter, he's of two books. I have his two books, Scientific Anomalies, Hybrid Humans. Some interesting topic. Aliens I want to get into. I am. It's a weird thing though. Since interrupted connection. Anyways, I want to bring Bruce aesthetic. I like the, what is that, a rug?
Spiritual metaphysics. So kind of
strange and let's say less mainstream
physics, paranormal. But yeah, we have a lot of overlap.
Yourself, what got you interested?
I was drawn towards the ancient past, really, from my earlier, I suppose, more intense topics. My grandmother was typhoon. Right there, there's a young series, and that's probably a lot of your life.
Yeah, the unanswered question. That and all of these things rising seem to be more we figure out so strange and create some models that works as is.
Be able to test of scientific discovery, because that includes the known and the unknown, the questions in there, and come to proof, of course. And I know that a lot to say we've proven something.
As an accepted theory, never changing fact about getting some weird shine on my face.
We have to be careful that the facts, be left without any force on it. It's rare to say that, we've got a standard that few scientists would.
The beauty of science is that certainty, I would say, is 99% out there, or a matrix control, or, a good skeptic of what you've been visited and
here from the get. But that's certainly
simplifying it as much as possible. Demonstrations that have convinced you
in the origins of life itself. And if we look even at the colleague, forgotten the understanding that we had this such a come about by chance, right? Could well indicate there maybe have been a panspermia event that brought DNA here, because it just seemed so complex, and having arisen so early on Earth, it just seemed unlikely that level of complexity could have come about in the short period of which, geological time up until the point DNA appears. And we now know that it seems that the first indicators of life on Earth are around about 4.4 billion years ago. And that's both in terms of, there was a fairly recent study looking at DNA itself, trying to track it back to what's called the universal common ancestor, and the indications are from the DNA mapping that this goes back to about 4.5 billion. In terms of the fossil record, I think the earliest we've got to at the moment is about 4.1. But then they also suggest there, well, look, it's unlikely we found the earliest fossil, and they speculate it probably goes back to about 4.3, 4.4.
Yeah, I think looking at the evidence, it's reasonable to say that essentially, as soon as we believe life was able to survive and start forming on the planet, it did. It started. The abiogenesis model of, having the right concoction plus enough time in the oven gave birth to this. I think there might be a missing element to that, but panspermia is not. It's not really a crackpot idea necessarily. Some people have entertained it. I've talked to Richard Dawkins about it. He says it's an interesting idea. It's just we need, if we're going to posit this as a claim, we just need evidence, right? Like we need. It's not enough to say that because. It's not enough to say it's plausible that life was delivered because we have all of these astronomical events that have changed the Earth. I don't think it'd be reasonable to say that it's plausible that this did happen.
But it's definitely within the realm of possibilities of things that could happen with regards to life, right? And then the question would be like, it opens the can of worms of, okay, was this? Some people think that maybe there was ancient forms of life on Mars, and something hit Mars and sprayed some matter onto Earth. There's a lot of different versions of that, or comet, simple forms of comet life, or things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. And do you just think it's more likely that happened? Like, because you mentioned chance. So let's talk about, because life would have had to, had some good luck at some other place, right? And it would have engaged with the same idea of chance, but you have a hard time accepting it on planet Earth, right?
Well, I'd qualify a couple of things. First thing, I would also challenge the abiogenesis, people to give their evidence, because that's missing.
Yeah.
Right? So although they would sell
I think
us
that's
the idea,
why, yeah. I think that's why it's not really like, a lot of people don't posit abiogenesis as the complete answer. They just say, here's a way in chemistry that this could have happened on Earth, but we don't have the demonstration for where it did, right?
No, and we also have problems there, because if abiogenesis can happen and happen so readily, as you point out, that life appears as soon as this planet is habitable, and yet we have no evidence that it ever happens again in the subsequent 4.4 billion years, right? So that's problematic. And a lot of scientists have pondered that. Why don't we see a second abiogenesis event? Why is it that all life on this planet, it seems the DNA can trace back to this universal common ancestor? That is problematic. And obviously there are scientists who are looking for what they call the shadow biosphere, which is this possibility that there are other life forms within the soil. There may be some bacteria or microbes somewhere deep down that it comes from a separate event, right? But it's never been found at this point. Now, we also realize today that out in space, we find pretty much all the components for life. We've basically found all the building blocks, all the proteins,
stuff.
We need, right? Yeah. So this equation has shifted quite heavily from totally speculative that life would come from outer space to, hang on a minute, this is actually looking quite strong now, right? Whereas abiogenesis, if anything, has weakened. We haven't found a second event, and we haven't found, really a convincing theory of how geology gave way to biology, geology and chemistry gave way, but we haven't. So that we're now finding the components for life in space is really shifting this conversation. And as you probably know, there's a lot of academics that are beginning to slide towards panspermia quite rapidly, in terms of that perhaps we had it wrong assuming abiogenesis, and we should have assumed panspermia. I mean,
right, but the problem with the problem with panspermia is that you're essentially dealing with the same model that would have to exist somewhere else, right?
Well, not quite, because if DNA has emerged, let's say later on down the road, that there may be life forms out there that came about from a simpler building block, and that DNA is actually, so complex because it has billions of years of history, or has been deliberately engineered by a species that was not based on DNA, that evolved from something else. Let's say DNA is technology, right? If DNA is technology, used for terraforming planets, for example, sure, right? Then you could come up with this unbelievably complex code, this molecule, as perhaps a super intelligence, like a galactic super intelligence, AI or something, writing us this code and then sending that out. Now, that doesn't mean the first life forms in the universe were based on such complexity.
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, even, but wouldn't you say that like the earliest forms of self-replicating cells, you would kind of categorize them as being quite complex?
Because the DNA code itself is, the way DNA works is so complex that I don't think we can really say that. We can say that life is more complex now, but the way DNA works to code life, that hasn't really changed. I mean, that's the same. So we begin with that complexity. And that's why Crick and stuff, started to theorize, could it be that there was maybe even a directed panspermia event with extraterrestrial civilizations sending DNA out in microprobes? Because they couldn't really explain how this had just jumped. And I've seen it described, somebody say, it's like having a 747, built by a whirlwind.
It's quite an event. It's not a lot of people just kind of look at that first thing and they think that they think that because it happened here that you would expect on all of these planets that are in kind of that honeymoon zone or whatever that we would find a lot of versions of life, but there seems to be a bit of a missing puzzle, and that's one of the exciting discoveries to be made, I think, in the field. And I'm really glad to hear, Bruce, that you are not positing some kind of supernatural intervention. You're looking for an answer within the realm of the cosmos, and I think that's a good thing. It's look, it's within the realm of possibility. I don't know how plausible it is that this, because here's another thing. Like you were talking about complexity. Like you have a problem with the imagining nature sprouting something so complex, seemingly out of non-life to life. When I look at chemical compounds and how chemistry can give rise to some very strange activity, I guess I don't have. I suspect that we are going to find some answer in chemistry, or perhaps some unwritten physical law that shows us that life is kind of like, it just hasn't been demonstrated yet, but it's kind of like a physical law, like we can demonstrate magnetism, how magnetism works, but it's just not as easy to demonstrate because of the amount of time and the complexity you see in the DNA code is just a matter of how much time the boiling pot has to boil. But
I mean, one of the things NASA are looking at the moment is this idea of, well, we've decided what life is, right? And we've given these characteristics of life, but that maybe we needed to rethink this and maybe think there's I think what they call life, LYFE, that that there may be something else that does not really mesh with our current model for life. Well, that we may be not quite, like, let's say, for example, look, crystals, right? They replicate and they grow and they transform surrounding areas into more crystals. They do some of the things that we would consider life to do, right? But we wouldn't look at crystals, and say, hey, look, those are alive. Hi, but maybe there's something else out there, that we wouldn't immediately see as being alive, right? But there is some kind of intermediary or has consciousness on some level that we don't really understand, right? Because we've decided what life is. And I think we have to be wary because we don't know what else is out.
Although our label of life is pretty helpful to us, like we can even differentiate between bacteria and virus. But what you're bringing up is interesting. It's like, technically viruses don't really fall into that category of a living thing, but bacteria does. So I think that's a really good example of showing, like, we can see life-like things that give, like, because if we found a virus operation on another planet, we're not going to be any less excited because it doesn't fit into our category of life. But I think what we would call it is something else, perhaps, like, we might just call it a virus. Like, we found a planet of viruses that just operate in this process, and they feed off the let's just say the matter around them, and eventually they'll deteriorate the astronomical body, and that's that. But you do bring up a good point that people shouldn't think of, like, maybe another way to think about it is keep the label of life as we see it on the planet and keep searching for that, but don't let your detectors fall down to not notice other anomalies, other interesting things like viruses or something like that, right? A different form of virus that essentially just eats, I don't know, like hydrogen or whatever, right? It's eating moon rock or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to look for the unexpected and for, interesting processes, interesting things, anomalies, not just to have a rigid view of, we will go out and look for these, these characteristics. Yeah. Otherwise, we haven't found anything worthwhile. So we definitely care about that. And if we look at, obviously touched on the consciousness kind of topic, from an animist or kind of shamanic point of view, all things have some life in them, and I tend towards that view that we have to be a bit wary, is there some element of consciousness, at least, in all things, in terms of rocks, animals, plants? If there is, on some level, some consciousness that we don't fully understand, maybe that also plays a role in the arising of life from chemical processes, geology, into biology. We don't really know. There's things that on those edges of, we don't really understand consciousness, right?
That's so conscious. So I'll buy that. We don't understand consciousness. I'm working on it. That's the topic of my first book, The Pleasure Drive Theory. But you're talking about the realm of possibility. Okay, sure. It's possible that a rock might have consciousness, some level of consciousness. But if the reason why I don't spend a lot of time on possibility is because the more I study the cosmos, the more I see that there is essentially infinite possibility for everything. So I tend to want to look at, and I'm sure when you're engaging with the scientific hemisphere of your brain, you're thinking about plausibility as well. And so I want to go back to one thing. You said that it seems that human beings are in communication with some other being. And what is your demonstration of that?
All right. Well, the communication, I mean, again, you start going to realms where science struggles, obviously, with some of these topics, because what we want is in the lab, repeatability, be able to put something in there that we can put under experimental conditions and repeatedly observe, right? But what we often find instead is high strain, what I would consider some of the indicators of ongoing contact, goes into sort of cyclical. Obviously the unbelievable numbers of accounts of people having extraordinary anomalous events where they openly say, we had contact with something that was non-human. Now that can range in from visionary experiences to what they did telepathic experiences, or people just literally saying that, I was with my friends and we saw, something, or we heard a voice. So I think within that within that high strangeness, there's going to be lots of, garbage. There's going to be some mental illness that we can all accept that there's that. But I also find that within it, there are themes, repeating themes. But the problem is that to then demonstrate them scientifically is very difficult, because these tend to be random, sporadic events which are given to us largely through anecdotes. So they're very difficult. So really, when you go to that part of it, you have to look at it as, I suppose, it's evidence that would convince a court, but not necessarily evidence that would convince, a peer review panel, right? So if I'm sitting there looking at it as a judge rather than as a scientist, I would say that the balance of evidence is that with all these thousands and thousands of accounts going from prehistory till now, that human beings have been in contact with some kinds of non-human intelligences, and that they have transferred, in some cases, information that has been validated. I mean, there's lots of accounts. I mean, there's a famous Indian scientist who said he was in contact, I can't remember the name, but he was in contact with a being who gave him sorts of mathematical formulas. Those mathematical formulas are still used today, some of them. So things happen that are very strange that we can't explain. And in the statements from those involved, they tell us they were in contact with something. So I'm not going to say that this is demonstrated in terms of an academic peer review panel would accept it. But on a personal level, I feel there's enough evidence of contact with some kind of non-human intelligence that I personally am convinced by it. But I'm not going to say somebody who hasn't looked at hundreds and hundreds of thousands of accounts should then just take my word for it,
right?
Because that's not how it works.
So
That's different to my argument for aliens coming here, which I just say is based on a bit more solid evidence.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll get to that one. Um, isn't it more reasonable to believe that people are just engaging with their imaginations?
Well, again, you have these problems because then you have to say, how do we have these collective groups where multiple people
Yeah.
suddenly all engage with the same imagination, right? Where
Yep.
they all report the same phenomena, and also where that phenomena gives, as I say, information which is independently validated. Now, that's not always the case, but there are instances we know where the information was, taken by somebody, and they thought, well, let's see if this voice's information meant anything, and there's, sometimes it does, sometimes it pans out. I mean, I think just quite recently, I was listening to an interview with, I think Professor Diana Pasolka. She's a religious scholar. She was talking about how she was, for her book, American Cosmic, which is about UFOs, the subculture, also. She was dealing with some people in the kind of the secret services type world, the deep, I suppose called deep state type world. Some of these intelligence community that have an interest in UFOs and the paranormal. Obviously, there's people in that world that have an interest in these things, right? And some of them were telling her, look, we've had information that's given to us by these other intelligences where we've created technologies and they're sold. We've made millions of dollars selling these things. So they said people can believe what they want, but we create real technologies from information that's coming from these intelligences, and we sell that. And there's some of it's medical tech and stuff. And they said we've made millions of dollars selling the tech. And
Right.
if you look at the history of the NASA program itself, I mean, you had rocket boosters that were designed by wizards. That we had. What's again the guy who founded the Jet Propulsion Labs? It's kind of like, he was involved with Aleister Crowley and or Jack Parsons. Sorry, he's out there doing rituals in the desert, calling on entities, and he designed pentagram-shaped solid rocket fuel boosters that helped start the space program. He's saying he got that information from other intelligences.
Yeah.
And that was used.
Yeah. So when someone says, I'm getting this information coming from other intelligences, how are they differentiating between getting it from other intelligences and it's not, some kind of human technology beaming that information into their head?
Well, I mean, where would we get it from if that didn't exist in, like we said, the rocket boosters? If nobody on Earth had those, how could anyone beam it into his head?
So here's the thing. Isn't it more reasonable to believe that there's like a human collection of people who have come up with technologies, but they believe it has to be revealed in a certain way. So they send some kind of mechanism towards someone's brain, and it gives them the information, and they have this revelation. Isn't it more plausible that this is all happening within the realm of humanity rather than invoking some other higher intelligence?
Not really. If we go back now, we're talking, 50, 60 years ago. So if there is somebody that has technology that could be beaming things in people, rocket booster information into people's heads, I mean, then we must be talking about some sort of crypto-terrestrial culture that its entire scientific development is secret to us. That, there's no trace of its development. We can always find, a trace of how a technology develops, right? Because we'll have scientists around the world that, hey, well, I discovered that piece before and I knew how that works. And we have a data trail, right? So none of the technology we have today appear out of nowhere. Like there was this argument that, did we reverse engineer a crashed alien ship, Roswell and all this, and did that give us the components we use in technology today? But when people have looked closer at that, you find that all these technologies had a trail, and that although they weren't necessarily in use until more recent times, academics around the world, had developed the concepts for all of these computer components and stuff that have been claimed as coming from the Roswell crash. Right? All of those can be explained as, hang on, look, in the 50s, so-and-so knew this, this other guy knew that. We can put that trail together. Now, if a technology just appears in the way that you're saying, that would infer a crypto-terrestrial civilization, somebody else here on this planet hidden away that really has developed way past us into, a space age that's far beyond ours.
Or just a little bit ahead, right?
Strange. Is it less strange than aliens communicate with? It gets to a point where it's so strange in and of itself, the crypto-terrestrial kind of argument that we have these other humans here, perhaps, who are, I don't know, hidden maybe under the sea or in a cave.
Or just advanced military, right?
Well, again, that would have to have a trail with the sciences. I mean, you can't have soldiers just coming out with this tech. They have to have scientists who are
Sure.
pulling in this information from somewhere. So
But
it's,
the reason why I'm bringing this up, Bruce, I think the same reasoning you just used to squash
yeah.
that hypothetical I just brought up, I think if you apply that to your alien theory, the alien information delivery theory, it squashes that as well, unless you buy into the eyewitness testimony of people saying, you know, in my imagination, I saw this alien gray telling me this information. And then someone will be like, well, why does that person over there think of alien grays as well? Or that person over there? And I think part of the reason is because there is this idea of global pop culture that travels around, right? Don't you see that? Like,
well,
because obviously you wouldn't believe that every single person that imagines that they were, let's say, abducted has actually been abducted. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of crap out there.
I think, and also I think the abduction itself, is a very complex topic because, first of all, as you pointed out, we've got this strange fact that people around the world see the same thing. Not everybody that has one of these kind of experiences sees exactly the same thing, but we have a lot of people who do. They see this short being with big eyes, the bald head, kind of gray alien. Now, that's very strange because if we say that, okay, perhaps these are hypnagogic and hypnopompic experiences, as some suggest, that these people are in some kind of sleep paralysis and they experience hypnagogia, that's okay because we can say, okay, dream phenomena, we all dream, we all have altered states. But where it becomes problematic, of course, is the themes that why do we have the same imagery? Why do we have the same kind of events? Why are they taking their sperm? Why are they taking people to a ship? Why do we have a guy in Japan, saying it? Why do we have a guy over in Africa saying? Why is it always the same? Because I'm sure we all dream at night, but we don't all dream the same dream. So there's something stranger here. That doesn't mean that straight away it's aliens.
Yeah.
But we have to straight away think, well, hang on, there's something odd here.
Yeah.
Either in the neurology of human beings or in a causal phenomena. But then if you dig deeper into that, you find that some of these people you could say are having a altered state experience, right? Because you'd look and say their partner would say, okay, well, I know they didn't leave the room. I'm in the house with them. I walked in, they were there unconscious or whatever. They never left the building. Okay, so we have cases like that.
Yeah.
And then you have other ones where people say, well, no, they were found in the forest, naked, and they've got burn marks on them, scoops, and so there's simply different things happening even within that phenomena itself, right? Where you've got physical evidence of something strange, and other cases where I would definitely say were metaphysical or were consciousness related, where you couldn't say there's any support of physical evidence for what they're telling you, and yet the two are the same. They were still, you've got people physically leaving their rooms, coming back with their clothes on wrong, and they're seeing those same grey beings as the ones that are not leaving the room. So again, it's stranger and stranger the more you look into it.
So, and how much do you think, like early pop culture in film and in science fiction writing, has that shaped the versions of aliens that people are seeing in these experiences? Because for me, it's quite plausible that these shapes and these eyes and these heads are coming from the minds of creative people who have thought on what a Martian might look like, and then they get ideas of insect shaped heads and eyes, and they have this idea that they would kind of be more gruesome looking to us, and they wouldn't look like us, and they would not be our same height, they would be different. So there's all of these differences, but I see this pop culture image of going back to the earliest examples of drawings and things like that. And then people, even if they're in Japan, they'll get a copy of it. People be reading it. People be telling stories about it. And this all just creates this collective cultural idea of what an alien looks like. And then you get that kind of Alienware computer shape of a alien head. But then you have other creative people that come along and be like, that's just one part, because I drew this coloring book of all of these different versions of aliens I've met with.
If you, certainly these things could be shaped. And again, I think this is perhaps a reactive phenomenon in some way, because if you look at, say, some of the early UFO research, UFO contact, John Keel particularly was interesting because, he did loads and loads of research, journalists that, initially started out just interested because of the UFOs, the flying saucers and stuff, so he started to look into this and the related paranormal topics. And one of the things he pointed out, he said, in the end, it was so glaring was that there, in fact, there were so many kinds of aliens that what got in was not the similarity of so many people seeing greys, but that there was so many different kinds of aliens and so many different kinds of ships that he said, in the end, you couldn't accept that this was alien beings visiting for the opposite reason, that there was just too many. He said it was almost as if there was a space monster and a ship for each of us.
Yeah. It's kind of like gods, right? People create gods, and you ask someone, and I've done this with a lot of people, draw a picture of what God is. And it's a difficult task, but you get the creative mind engaging with the belief system, and people draw very interesting, very 100% original images of what they're feeling and seeing and how that interacts with their mind. Well,
again, I think that we're dealing with a reactive phenomena. Now, one of the examples I give is Terence McKenna, the famous, sort of scholar of psychedelics, anthropology. He was down in Peru somewhere, and he saw a flying saucer. Right, he was in the jungle, saw a flying saucer. Now, what really struck him, he said, was the flying saucer looked exactly like the one that he had seen in a photo from I'm trying to think now, one of these famous contactees, I forgot the guy's name, but one of these famous contactee cases of the time. And he said what really struck him was it was the same saucer. And he said he couldn't help thinking that whatever it was that was betraying this to him had taken the image from his mind and had then put this image there for him. And that it was a reactive phenomena of some sort. That rather than being objectively, that's what, there's an alien ship and they look like this. So there's definitely an element of your mind involved in whatever's happening. That it's not a nuts and bolts thing. Where a lot of UFO people, right, they want this to be as easy as, aliens have come from space in their ships and are visiting us. And that, there's these nuts and bolts ships like our planes, as real as that are landing here, and come to visit. It definitely is not as simple as that. That the phenomena behind the really strange, high strangeness events, not the made up ones, the ones where there's enough high strangeness and evidence to say something unusual is happening. It generally is pointing to at least an involvement of the human mind or consciousness in it. I definitely don't think we can't simplify it in that way, because there's two sides. You can say that it's too strange because many people see the same thing, but you also say it's too strange because so many people have also seen so many different things. And would we really believe that 1,000 different alien races are all visiting us at once, or 10,000? I mean, that in itself as well would seem absurd. That it'd be strange enough if a couple were, but 10,000 different aliens and they've all got different ships. And, so that in itself, again, was an element that pointed to this is at least in some sense to do with what's going on in here. And I absolutely think that most of these events are happening in a state of mind that we don't quite recognize, that's between lucid dreaming and full consciousness. And that there's an event that happens in that space, because we get this we're often told that people say it went very quiet, they couldn't hear any animals, the bugs went quiet, and they felt that they were kind of not quite in their normal world, right? And some people call it the Oz factor, that in these events. So to me, that indicates that this is you're shifting in some way out of normal consciousness. Your senses, your ears, your normal senses are no longer important. They're going inwards in some way, but yet you still see the same scene around you. And that happens in lucid dreaming a lot. You experience that, where you can feel like you're in your room. Your room looks identical. You're walking around in your room, and at some point you may become aware that you're not awake, right? So there's definitely an overlap. And I think that this is happening in that kind of space, something like with psychedelics, where we see that when people take psychedelics, the whole brain lights up. That there's this kind of neuroconnectivity that we don't see in normal waking or in sleep. So there are these other states of the brain, which I think sometimes become engaged, and perhaps very similar to psychedelic states, not the same, that are existing in a space that we don't have a name for. And I think that's where a lot of these events are happening. Now, because it's happening in a space between lucid dream and waking, again, I wouldn't like to say these are either physical or dreams. I think we're going to end up having to give a new category for the whole experience. But I also contend that we are getting information from that state, which sometimes is useful in objective reality. So there's an indicator. Either we have a part of the brain talking to us that knows stuff on some other level, right? And that we in some way are convincing ourselves that we're deluding ourselves, but we're having a conversation with ourselves and are seeing imagery that the brain has conjured up for some reason, right? That we don't understand. Or that we are entering a space where something else is in communication with us. Now, you could almost toss a coin and say, well, I feel it's more the other, and I feel it's more one. I don't think it's something where I could prove that I'm right, or I could prove that you are right. I would have to say that it's such a gray area for the moment to say fully what's happening. And that's why that mystery has endured until now.
So isn't the best position as a scientific thinker to say, I don't know to these phenomenons, as opposed to posit a positive claim? You
should admit that you are not certain. As I say, I'd only be convinced in terms of a judge sitting in a jury. I wouldn't say that this would pass a peer review. So if you were to say, okay, on the balance of evidence, looking at all these accounts, what do you personally feel it is, right? Yeah. Then I would say, personally, I feel that. If someone said, do you feel that, a really well-supported scientific theory that you could write up and it would get into Science magazine?
Right.
Probably not, no.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we have to know where that lies.
And I think it's people should, when it comes to making or demonstrating claims about reality, people should rely on the scientific method, because I think that's all we got, right? And of course, if we're talking in the realm of art, in the metaphysical realm, in the ought side of our brain, I think it leaves the potential for any of these things to be influential on the human being. Of course, these transcendent type experiences that have been reported in, when it comes to gods, aliens, ghosts, all of these things. I think people shouldn't confuse that these are demonstrations of what is, but they should, they should kind of think of them in an artistic way until there has been a demonstration that these things actually are existing, manifesting in reality, instead of just, manifesting in their mind in a meaningful way and sometimes terrifying way, it seems, in some of these cases.
Sure. Can be quite horrific. I mean, in terms of physical, objective scientific evidence of a contact between Earth and something else, or our solar system, even something else, I only know of I'd say 2 cases that really I consider can meet that. Now, one being more speculative than the other, if you like. And I'd suggest the one that's more speculative is the recent one, which is, of course, Oumuamua. We have obviously a lot of debate going on over whether or not the Oumuamua object could have been a technology moving through our solar system, right? Which has been that's kind of objective stuff, right? Okay, we can say we've measured it, we have some scientific data to go on, right? And so, I mean, people may have seen recently, obviously Avi Loeb's been making his case for that. We have an object that had unusual characteristics, reflectivity, a type of motion we wouldn't expect as it passed through the solar system, passing between the 2 most likely to be habitable planets in our solar system, Earth and Mars. And so we have all of those things going on. But for me personally, I'd say that my own research makes a better case for there being an alien visitation to this solar system. And that's why I would say with this other stuff that we're talking about, I lean towards contact, because I'm already scientifically convinced that we've had a visitation in the remote prehistory.
And what is that? And just to talk about quickly, just so if everyone wants to know what we're talking about, how do you pronounce this? Oumuamua.
I think it's Hawaiian for scout from afar.
Right. Okay. So yeah, NASA has a pretty good explanation on their website, solarsystem.nasa.gov, just to take a look at what data is available so far, Yeah, these properties suggest that is dense, composed of rock and possibly metals, has no water or ice, and that its surface has reddened due to the effects of radiation from cosmic rays over hundreds of millions of years. Yeah, so there's some interesting information here. And why do you think this is something that's a big mystery?
Yeah, one of the, I mean, I've just been reading Loeb's book actually, which he talks about why he feels this could be an extraterrestrial technology, and he actually posits that this is probably a solar sail, and in fact, it doesn't, whereas you see all these pictures looking like a large cigar-shaped piece of rock, he doesn't think that's what it was like. He said actually, if you look at the way that particularly the way it was pushed by sun, it seemed to have got a push from sunlight as it left our solar system. That would indicate something very flat, in fact, very thin. And he suspects maybe just millimeters in thickness, and that instead you'd have and he thinks a large circular object based on the way its reflectivity was changing as it span, and the fact that it got this accelerating boost. That wouldn't really happen with an asteroid or a comet. If a comet outgassed, we'd be able to detect that. So for it to just suddenly get this push as it's leaving indicated that sunlight was accelerating it. Now that fits really well with a solar sail. So he suspects we had a circular, extremely thin object. Now it essentially was waiting in space rather than it accelerating in. But the funny thing is, as our solar system met it in open space, it happens to go right between Earth and Mars, which, let's be honest, are in the habitable zone of our solar system. It doesn't pass through, by Jupiter or Saturn. It comes right through the habitable zone between the orbital plane passing through the orbital plane between where Earth and Mars would be going, which is again is an indicator. Is this a probe that is there to detect life in a solar system? Because that's where we would expect life to be in the solar system, is in that habitable zone. So that was another indicator of its anomalous behavior. And then, of course, you had the reflectivity, which is probably a kind of metal. So he came to the conclusion that if we were to weigh this up against all known objects, that you start having to come up with exotic objects instead. And he said, so really, where people have tried to dismiss it, they've had to come up with solutions which are in themselves exotic, right? So nobody's been able to just say this is a normal asteroid or this is a normal comet. And he feels that really that it's a case of the academics don't want to go there with aliens, and so they're coming up with anything else.
So NASA says, and we'll get to why you think no one wants to go there, because that
Sure.
I think that's where we start getting into conspiratorial thinking. But it says here on the NASA website, astronomers estimate that an interstellar object similar to your mama passes through the inner solar system about once per year, but they are faint and hard to spot and have been missed until now. It is only recently that survey telescopes such as Pan-STARRS 1 are powerful enough to have a chance to discover them. So it sounds like this author you're talking about is making a lot of leaps here that NASA isn't willing to leap. Like they're not willing to make these leaps. Why do you think NASA isn't buying into this author's theory of what's going on?
Well, I mean, it's not just NASA, as he says; it's his whole of his own community. I mean, he's the head of Harvard Astronomy, and he's the main guy for the Starshot project to send probes to Alpha Centauri. So I mean, he's obviously a very respected scholar in his field, but he finds that within that community of space scientists that there is an aversion to going there with the possibility of advanced aliens in some way interacting with our solar system, whereas microbiology is kind of okay, right? That they expect bacteria, but as soon as you go to this side, you see there's a kind of closed-minded groupthink that no, it can't be.
Well, you're making a huge claim when you say aliens, right? It's there's no good reason here when it comes to this comet to say aliens, right?
There is, though, isn't there? Because if you can't give another explanation for it that's more reasonable, right, then the most reasonable one, as he points out, you have to go to it.
No, you don't, though. That's not the way skepticism works. It's better to say, I don't know, if you don't have a demonstration.
But if you're looking at it, it shows the characteristics you expect of a solar sail.
Why would we know what that is?
Because we know that for sunlight to give a push, you're dealing with an object that has to be able to interact with, to be able to be pushed by photons of light. So an asteroid, a large bulky asteroid, would not be affected by photons of light pushing it. There would be no effect of that.
Sure. But why do we think it's solar energy, solar light, photons pushing it?
Because they measured an acceleration as it's leaving the solar system. So there's an anomalous acceleration event.
Anomalous acceleration event. It was near the position. I don't see that. I don't see NASA mentioning that.
You have to have a look. That's one of the reasons why it flagged up, was they had to try and explain, why is this object suddenly accelerating away?
Right, but why would someone then posit that it's photon acceleration?
So if you go through the possibilities, I mean, what you've got, say if it was a comet and you have outgassing, we can detect the outgassing. So this is their argument, is that, you see a trail, right? Like on a comet, when it starts to heat up, you get a trail, you get the tail on a comet. So they're looking for all these known indicators of objects. So it remains anomalous once they've gone through all of the checklist of, what can explain what we're seeing. It's left anomalous. Now, that doesn't mean that the whole academic community agrees with him, because of course, I say they're kind of coming down on him with the view that, well, it's so extraordinary that, as the claim, extraordinary claims, the extraordinary evidence, and so on. That, but however, his complaint is that there's more of an unwillingness to go there at all, which is problematic.
Because he's going there, right?
Sorry?
He's willing to go there. And when he says
that in his community, that's not something that people are comfortable with. And that's the space scientists who we are hoping are looking for signs of advanced civilization out there.
I mean, I've spoken to some of the greatest, mainstream scientific communicators, and they don't have the attitude that they're not willing to go there and talk about it. It's just when they sit down with one of these people that proposes that aliens had some kind of hand in this thing, that's what they think. They say, well, why do you think aliens? Why are you jumping to aliens? And then they say, and they have no good reason as to why they would jump there. Their reasoning is, well, it's possible that a civilization could have done this, but that's not science. That's not interesting. Everything is, like I was saying, everything is essentially possible. It's so, that's why it's not taken seriously unless there's evidence of aliens.
Well, I mean, he's not, as far as I understand it, he doesn't say categorically, this must be aliens. Like, he's saying that this is looking at all of the evidence they have available. Because bear in mind, we didn't get a good image of it, right? It was already flying away from the solar system. So you're left to deduce from the data that's available. So going on the data that's available, what he comes up with is it's closest in terms of known phenomena that we can, put it in there with. It's closest to the behavior of a solar sail. So it doesn't mean it must categorically be, because again, you can always say, as you said, infinite possibilities. Maybe there's some natural object out there that we've never encountered that behaves like a solar sail, right? Because again, if you're going to infinite possibilities, we can say that. But if we're going through known phenomena, there's not a known phenomena that explained it. And as he said, it ends up with exotic explanations, like fluffy conglomerates of dust and stuff. He says things that are not observed and which should fall apart in space. So he says you start coming up with these anomalous kind of explanations. So however we explain Oumuamua, it would be something new. Put it that way.
So you don't think it's a comet?
Well, they're categorically sure it's not a normal comet. So
not a normal comet, but there's still, I mean, NASA's calling it a comet.
Well, again, he has to defend his own arm. From what I've seen, he's made a very good case for it not being a comet. So, I mean, but then...
Right. So, but the problem is, Bruce, is that the scientific consensus, would you agree, says that, this is a comet, even if it's a strange comet that we're not used to seeing, which they kind of admit.
That's a really strange way to conclude it, wouldn't it? Because if they can't show that it's a comet, why is it a comet?
Well, because it's got the properties of, like, the first... here we go. The very deep combined images at the center of the let's say, while originally classified as a comet, here we go. Observations revealed no signs of cometary activity after it slingshotted past the sun on September 9th, 2017 at a blistering speed of 196,000 miles per hour. It was briefly classified as an asteroid until new measurements found it was accelerating slightly, a sign it behaves more like a comet. So, there's an explanation there of, okay, we originally classified it as a comet, except it's got some acceleration. So now, it slingshot past, it was briefly classified as an asteroid. So yeah, it seems like there are, there are categories in which we are using in the scientific realm to understand what this thing is. But if it was doing something extraordinary, right, Bruce, and we didn't have a scientific explanation, I don't know is the correct answer here until we can investigate. It's not reasonable, as far as I'm concerned, from my skeptical foundation, to accept any kind of alien explanation without any evidence of anything alien, right? And if you're going to say solar sail, it's like the examples we have of solar sails are just nothing like that, right?
Well, I mean, what do you mean? Sorry, by nothing like that.
Well, based on what we anticipate this thing looks like, right? Like NASA has a pretty good idea of what this thing looks like, and that it kind of looks like a comet, but functions a little bit differently. But our versions of solar sails are essentially, these large sunlight mirrors, right?
I suspect that article's a little bit out of date, because the final, if you look at the most recent articles, they include the most likely shape is some kind of extremely thin, more circular object. So again, what we had for the last 2 years, all these pictures of this cigar-like object, they agree, even his kind of opponents kind of agree that actually on balance, it is slightly more likely that it's this thinner circular object. So, I mean, for 2 years, we've had pictures and pictures of a cigar-shaped object, but that really, they say, doesn't really best match the data they have. So it's misleading. A lot of the pictures people have seen are quite misleading.
Yeah, it's not. They obviously say that this is it's an artist. They're looking at artist depictions here.
Shape of it now, they don't think that's the best match. I mean, that was initially thought to be the best match to the data they had, but now it's not. So again, if we're looking at that and we think, oh, it looks probably, if you were thinking this is something a few millimeters across, you start getting a very strange object.
A few millimeters across.
To be pushed by the sunlight, he suspects you have to deduce down to how is this thing being pushed. So you start to have a large object that's very thin that's pushed by sunlight. So this is why they start getting to this point where it's something exotic. Even if it's not alien, it's something exotic. Even if it's a fragment of something, it's something odd, because you can't just have a large object, a large bulky object as they show there that would be accelerated in that way. Otherwise, they have to explain, the lack of outgassing and, they say the behavior we'd expect of a comet passing by the sun, which we can explain. We can say, okay, there's outgassing, it's accelerating away because of, again, so they're left with these anomalies. Now, it doesn't mean you can say this is 100% sure it's an alien. I don't think he says that either. But he's deducing down what are we left with? It's like the old thing, isn't it? When you remove all of the possibilities, what are you left with? So then you're left with having to consider things that you wouldn't have at the beginning.
Oh, you don't have to, though. You don't have to consider. You don't have to consider those things, because then you start considering gods, right? Because it's in the realm of possibility.
No. You can't say that God and aliens is in the same.
No. I'm not saying. I'm saying they're both in the realm of possibility, right?
I wouldn't put it in the same category, though, because I mean, we know life forms exist, right? Because we're sitting here. We don't have to go into. I can't prove to you sitting here that God exists, but I can prove to you life exists, right?
Yeah. Because no. I'm saying they're in the realm of possible explanations in this, and as far as I can tell, like I said to begin with, because I don't think we can be absolutely certain necessarily about anything. It is possible that let's say the God of the Christian Bible exists. It's possible. It's not impossible, but it's not plausible at all. So I'm looking at the plausibility meter. Okay, from a plausibility perspective, it's more plausible that it's aliens than gods, of course. Gods don't even
Never
trace
measure 'em.
on the plausibility measure. But of course, aliens do to some degree. But in this case, it's just like when I'm like, well, what's your reason to posit aliens here? And people are just like, well, because it's possible. I'm just like, well, that's not very interesting to me at all.
I don't think he ends. Again, I wouldn't say, and I don't like to defend other people's theories either.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I would say I don't think he ends with this must be aliens. That it's more that we should be looking to see can this be? For a start, if we're going to be looking for evidence of advanced alien civilization, if that's one of the missions of space sciences, right? The idea that we are looking to see if life is in space. We're looking both for simple life forms, bacterias, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But we are also, at least allegedly, looking for signs of advanced civilizations, radio waves, potentially other signatures, techno signatures. Then we can't go in with the view that we must eradicate aliens from that conversation. I mean, that definitely is not a way that we can do good science. So if we see indicators without exploring them, and this is one of the points he makes, we will never find aliens if we always remove them from it.
Yeah,
we say straight away, we must discount aliens. That's definitely not the way we do.
I don't think anyone says that, though. Have you
No,
ever
but
met
that's
a scientist?
Is that they are. That's really the problem he's finding, is that in those academic halls, there is an aversion to even going into the.
Well, I think they're laughing. I think they're laughing at him because there's no evidence of aliens.
I don't know. If he said it was absolutely aliens, then you could say, well,
he's saying that he has some reason to even investigate aliens, but he hasn't brought any evidence to the table to show that his investigations have shown that we should, to any level of plausibility, expect that this might be aliens. Like the answer right now is just it's detected matter that we thought was a comet, but then it's got asteroid type occurrences, and then we're like, okay, maybe it is a comet because we saw some acceleration, but it's like it nowhere in that realm of discovery is the scientific consensus saying, well, there is a big push at aliens here because of this, because there's just nothing to point at to say that it's operating like a sun sail or a proton sail, whatever you want to call it. It's just like I think the reason why people say it's just like, well, that's basically the same as saying I don't know. So just say I don't know, and we don't have to. If it is aliens, fine. It'll the evidence will be there. But what's the point? Just continue with the scientific method. You don't have to go further than I don't know for things that we don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It leaves in an unsatisfying position, doesn't it? Because then, if you find indicators of the behavior of a technology you understand, but then we say, let's not go there. I mean, that also leaves in a very. I still say that's a problematic position to resolve it on, because if we can say, well,
people say let's not go there, though.
That we resolved it, then be different. If we can say, okay, well, we're pretty sure, based on the what we've observed, that this can be explained by some other known phenomena, then you can sort of pretty much comfortably walk away. If you can't, then that other alternatives have to stay on the table.
But that's alien. That's alien of the gaps, right? It's like God of the gaps.
Again, if they're meshing with a technology we understand, then you're not having to invent it. If we had to say, okay, we had to invent an alien technology and mesh it with, and say, well, we think they have hyperdrives, and we think hyperdrives might work, then that would be definitely filling it in. But if we're saying it meshes with something we do understand, then
sure, but
that's not really going too far out.
But if you take the position as a skeptic, as a scientist, to say, well, if we don't know what this thing is, then I guess we're gonna accept the alien theory of this thing for now. That's just alien of the gaps. Like, that's God of the gaps 101. How people will say, well, because we don't understand this phenomenon, it's God until we can actually. It's like it's not reasonable to accept God in that situation.
No, obviously the position I assume he's in, again, I can't say what he's thinking, but I imagine is to then strengthen that, to continue strengthening that argument as much as far as it can go.
Yeah, and no one
sending a probe
and I know what you're saying is that, and if there are scientists out there saying, don't talk about aliens, it triggers me, it's too then they shouldn't. It's like the scientific process doesn't care about any kind of like stigma or weirdness of what kind of social feelings we have towards whatever.
People are people, aren't they? That's the problem. The process itself doesn't. But I mean, he pointed out one of his articles. He pointed out that he was asking some of his colleagues, had they ever looked for indicators of probes out in the asteroid belt? That we could look for high reflectivity. We could look to see, because if one of these ideas is to potentially there could be probes in our solar system, right? Because if we accept the idea, and again, it's the popular idea in science, is that there should be other life out in the universe. Again, we don't know there. You can't say they've proven it, but the assumption is probably there's life in the universe, right? That's, I think, pretty much the consensus view. It should be there.
And although let's not confuse that with intelligent life, because intelligent life is. Yeah,
probably some intelligent life somewhere out there.
Because if you think of
they might expect is probes. Okay, so that if civilizations had emerged anywhere in the Milky Way at any time, maybe billions of years ago, that if they ever reached a similar level of technology to us, we could imagine them sending out probes. So we might never find a civilization, but we're more likely to find a probe. And so one of the things that's been suggested is looking for what's called lurkers, or a kind of Bracewell probes, like AI probes, lurkers in our solar system.
Yeah.
Now, he was talking to someone, I guess, who's in the asteroid research kind of field, saying, has anyone ever thought to look to see if any of these objects in our solar system have unusual characteristics, like unusually high reflectivity that might indicate some kind of artificiality? And they're like, well, no, because we know we wouldn't find any. Now, those are the kind of problems that he kind of discusses. He raised the point that we have to be careful of these closed loops as well, because science isn't really about a person saying, well, we don't expect to. It's, well, let's look, because if it's a reasonable hypothesis and we can do it, then we should be open to doing it. This is where this idea of human beings not necessarily following the scientific method, that we can't assume all academics are entirely scientific all the time in their thinking, right?
So
that they also have their judgments, their assumptions, their biases, and sometimes those will unfortunately impact the possibilities of what we might look for in science.
So you brought up reasonable hypothesis, and of course, money spenders and for grants and things like that are looking for reasonable hypothesis to investigate. What you think is a reasonable hypothesis, or what this author you're referring to might think is a reasonable hypothesis, I think if the scientific consensus was that this was a reasonable hypothesis, money would be spent to investigate it. But I'm hearing an element of like, it's not being investigated because they're just phobic of aliens or something. But it sounds like a lot of people would just say that it's just not a reasonable hypothesis. Like it's kind of pulled out of thin air. Because if you say, Bruce, the reason why I think it's reasonable is because I can imagine a civilization like ours somewhere else that would put probes out. I can also imagine a civilization that started down the satellite, maybe even space travel route, and then they had some really bad interactions with shuttles being destroyed by the just how much stuff is flying around their particular system or their atmosphere, and then they built this kind of idea that we shouldn't be going out there because it's just death waiting for us, and then perhaps they live in that for tens of thousands of years of technological advancement, and they're kind of just keeping to themselves, maybe sending radio waves out. But it's not necessarily a given that probes would be of much interest to even if you get to the point so quickly. And if you can imagine us 20,000 years from now, of course we will be able to at that point download some element of what we are ourselves into software simulations, and And,
Sure.
it's like at that point, we're just kind of creating our own cosmoses, acting as gods within our own matrices. So, I think that's probably what a lot of the money lenders would say is that, well, why do you think this is a good hypothesis? And then if you say things like, well, I can imagine X, well, I think they're going to say, well, have we detected anything that we need to go and look at? Or have we looked hard enough to see if stuff is there? And then someone at NASA might say, yeah, we've done incredible amounts of data of what exists in this scope of space, and we just don't see any reason to believe there is anything of interest out there like a probe.
We could say, but then again, we're going to these of the human processes where we decide what's reasonable, what's important. I mean, for a start, we'd have to say, how important is the search for life? I mean, again, we can say there's more important things on Earth to do and all the rest of it. So we know it's not treated as the greatest priority, neither in science or in society, right?
Yeah.
Because there's lots of stuff we spend a lot more. Look, we spend a lot more on learning to blow each other up, like trillions of dollars on military spend. So we can see that space.
Well, I would say that's more from a human survival standpoint by looking at the ideological differences around the world, where some ideologies think it's okay to chop someone's head off for being a homosexual. Like, I think that's that human ape reality of looking around us, that we need to have technology in case these cultures get more out of hand than they already are.
We can see the drivers for it. But we're never going to see. There's no indication right now that space is considered anywhere near as important as military developments, right?
Oh, definitely. But wouldn't you say for good reason?
Well, you could say potentially, but I mean, it doesn't mean we necessarily see it have such a gulf in terms of how much we spend on space. So there is a narrow field of what we
I agree with you.
Space,
I agree
right?
with you.
So space is very limited. Like, I recognize we're not going to do all the projects that maybe you, I, or a space scientist or anyone would like to see done.
Yeah.
But we do see some things done which are in themselves quite unreasonable as well. I mean, look at the search for extraterrestrial intelligence as it exists now, which is almost entirely radio astronomy, right? There's nothing particularly reasonable about the idea that they're going to detect a radio waves from an advanced civilization by pure luck, really. Because if you look at it, and a lot of the scientists say this themselves, it's not just coming from me. I look at opinions from other space scientists in the field who say, well, look, the chances that another civilization out there existed at just the right moment, came up with the same sort of technology as us, radio waves, happens to have sent out these radio waves at a time in its development where it reaches us now at this time, and we happen to be pointing our radio telescopes in that direction of the infinite directions we could be pointing it.
But you just made that same argument about probes, man.
Hang on, I mean, you say this is something we're spending money on, though. This is the difference: is we are spending money on this.
Sure.
So,
but your argument, your the soundness of your logic, if you apply that to the probe theory that you were just talking about, then that's kind of the same ballpark.
But then we're spending money. That's what I'm saying. The difference is, so then we say, so why are we spending money on radio astronomy?
Well, here's an interesting thing about radio waves, though, is that radio waves, they're relatively easy to send out and detect, and it is a very primitive form of sound wave detection, right? So I think that's the thinking with like SETI and some of these other programs is perhaps if a more advanced technological entity was trying to reach us, perhaps we would find this very loud radio wave code that is just this basic code that is sent out by them because it's so primitive.
It's possible, but I think everyone agrees it's a needle in a giant haystack of needles.
But maybe SETI and those other scientists think that your probe proposition is an even deeper needle than the radio wave one. And that's why it's not investigated more.
Well, it's certainly possible because, again, I don't want to say for what that science when we're looking for life on Mars is currently very limited, aren't they? They're hoping that now we've realized a lot of these planets have water. It turns out there's water on a lot of moons, and that gives that chance that life may exist somewhere. But also, there is speculation that, look, if advanced life exists, true advanced civilizations, and if they've expanded through the Milky Way in the past, that they could have come through here, and that we might find relics on other worlds. We might find relics on the moon. We might find relics out on a moon going around to some planet somewhere. So, I mean, again, these are, although people could say, well, they sound very sci-fi, but I mean, these, there's papers on this. It's not something that is just totally imaginable. They calculate the probabilities of how many advanced civilizations could theoretically have existed since the beginning of the Milky Way. Again, these numbers are, always a bit speculative. It's kind of a garbage in, garbage out. If you make one wrong input of what you think the chances are of advanced civilizations to be out there, it ranges from something like 1 to 100 million or something, depending on what factors you put into these equations as to how many advanced civilizations you expect. So obviously we could be miles out. There might only be one, right? Or they might be at the other end of the scale, and there might be hundreds of thousands of them, in which case all of these probabilities like past visitations, probes, ships flying around, all of those increase with how many civilizations exist or have existed. And we can't know the answer to that. We have all these equations, but they don't tell us with any certainty, how many other civilizations could be out there. So, I mean, that's always a problem.
Well, even if you look at the vastness of our own observable universe, even 100,000 out there would be damn near undetectable. So, hopefully, because I find this all very interesting, that, and I don't think, and really, I really don't think there is any, scientifically verifiable evidence or demonstrations that we can point to say aliens. But one thing that is certain is that this idea of there being other life forms and intelligent life forms that we could interact with one day is a key source of scientific and artistic inspiration. This drive for us to want to actually spend some money to investigate and to call out to the cosmos and see if anyone calls back is an incredible testament to the inspirational power of all of this. And I think that's it's always fascinated me, this idea of other life forms, even if we find bacterial life forms on a different, this is something to be cherished and something to adventure towards and to expand our horizons. I just think it's a great thing. But Bruce, I'm going to let you go, but I want to say that I think we should keep this conversation rolling, and we should do a few more like this, because I think we're treading through some important territory from a skeptic perspective and also from a scientific perspective. I
appreciate that. And also because I've ended up more looking at Loeb's theory than my own. So I realized that, I probably should have explained more why I feel that there's been a visitation. But no, it's a good conversation. I think the fact, it's very contemporary. If people go and look, they can see that he's done a lot of shows, a lot of interviews at the moment. There's a lot of articles, so people can go away and have a look at that and decide for themselves whether there's something in it or not. But it's a fascinating topic. It's the first, I'd say it's probably the first person of his stature in terms of the academic field to go there with that any kind of level of commitment. So it's a fascinating time to be alive in terms of looking to see where that conversation goes, because if nothing else, it's going to prompt a lot of space scientists to at least talk about the alien topic. And I think over the next few weeks, we're obviously going to see some impact or fallout from Loeb's conversations, right? So it's going to be interesting to follow up. And certainly, we can have another chat. I can talk to you about the object that convinces me more, which is, my basis for why I think that our solar system is being visited. But that's dealing with something in the prehistoric past. We can come to that another time.
And I also I want to talk about your other book, Into Africa: The Theory of Human Evolution. All right, Bruce Fenton, thank you so much, guys. You can find Bruce on Twitter. You guys have the handle in the description of this video. But thanks, Bruce. Peace out, man.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, that was Bruce Fenton. Interesting conversation. We're going through the intricacies of how your skeptical foundation will come into into improving your language, how you talk about things that haven't been scientifically demonstrated, but are still in the realm of, you know, human experience to some level. So yeah, that was very interesting. I enjoyed that conversation, and we'll definitely get Bruce back. It's a fascinating topic, and I do think, you know, having an honest dialogue about the science available, and then where we're getting into the realm of imagination, and how that you know, how some people, you know, how Bruce brought up, and I do bring up that the difference between courtroom evidence and you know, scientific evidence is you know, the question at the end would be, if you were the judge sitting at your post, and you see all of these eyewitness testimonies, and you see this, you know, some anecdotes that people think are evidence and demonstration, are aliens guilty of existing, or at least guilty of visiting us, or not guilty? And again, in the courts, we don't say guilty or innocent. We say guilty or not guilty. So, are aliens guilty of visiting us? I don't see any good reason to believe that they are guilty of visiting us, but Bruce is on the side of, you know, if he's sitting there in the judge's table, he will say, well, it seems to be more likely than not. So he would posit that that is the case. But I think, you know, I want to see through these conversations with Bruce to see if there is any upgrade to be made on language and how we talk about what we think is more plausible than the other. So, but anyways, thank you guys for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Looks like we had a lot of viewers today. Please share this video around. Please like and subscribe, but most importantly, hit that notification bell, because YouTube is not really a fan of Pangburn. So if you don't hit the notification bell, you're not going to see when we go live. Join us on Discord. Our Discord link is in the chat. We have interesting conversations every day at the Pangburn Hangout. And yeah, come and get to know us on Discord. And again, thank you guys for all of you who stopped by, all of you in the chat. And as always, let art and science inspire.